My display setup. Wherever the next venue is. Still wants to reverse them. Okay, do it then. Okay, folks. Whoa, that's loud. For those of you still in the room from the last session, we do have a session starting like right now, another session for Ecrit. So you're welcome to join us, although we'll probably force you into taking notes. So if you're here for Ecrit, we'll start here in just a minute.
I feel like people should not be allowed to sit like on all sides. Like I think we should be friends with each other and kind of cluster in the middle. Can you guys come be our friend over here? Yes, it's just weird. I feel like.
So we'll get started like 30 seconds after somebody volunteers to take notes and we get a jabber scribe. Wow, I'm overwhelmed. I'm sorry? Roger is going to join virtually, I believe. He's going to try, if that's possible. Don't everybody volunteer at once for jabber scribe and note taker. Can somebody take some notes for us? Krister, that I was looking at you because that might make the meeting faster. Oh, yeah, just try and capture the sense of what's going on in the room. You know, title of the presentation and what's being talked about, right? Or major topics. Do we have a backup note taker so we can merge the two? And it's not a hard job, it's just something to do. Keeps you off of email while the meeting's going on. So welcome to Ecrit, IETF 96.5. Why is it? The slides are wrong. It's IETF 96 and we are not in Buenos Aires. Roger, if you're listening, thank you. So I'm Mark Lenzner, co-chair. Roger Marshall is attempting to join us virtually if he hasn't already joined. This is the note well. Hopefully you've read this and you understand that how to contribute to the IETF and what your responsibilities are in this area. Our agenda today, we're going to talk for about 5 minutes, bashing the agenda. So if you see anything up here you don't like, we're going to hear from Brian on data-only emergency calls, validation of locations around plan changes, and the extension to return complete and similar info. Now, we took those 3 documents and actually put them in working group last call this week, but we thought it would be good to let Brian state what he's made in the latest changes, because I believe he just updated them recently. So he's going to talk about those updates, and then you'll have comment, or you'll have the ability to comment in here. And then, of course, working group last call, please, review them intensely and comment on the list. We'll capture your comments in here and treat them as, working group last call comments. Then we have 2 presentations from Randy on in-vehicle emergency calls and Pan American e-call. And those will probably take the majority of the time. And then we got a few minutes at the end. It's an hour meeting. So is there anybody who wants to throw rocks at the agenda? No? Okay. Document status, additional data related to emergency calls in the RC editor queue. We talked about next generation vehicle initiated emergency calls in Pan American. We believe they're real close, ready to go to the IESG. There's been a lot of comments on the lists. The authors and those commenters are working those issues out now, and we'll listen to that shortly. And these are the 3 documents where we started working group last call this week on, and data only emergency, lost extensions, and validation of location. So milestones, we moved those out to November. Our aggressive schedule was March, but we moved those out to November. And while doing that, we discovered an error. They were listed on the milestones. The e-call, the Pan American e-call and the in-vehicle emergency calls are both listed as informational. I believe they're in the drafts as standards-based. We, the chairs, believe that was just an error on our part. We fat-fingered that when we put them in originally. If there's anybody causes any pain for anybody, please let us know. In other words, if you thought those drafts are going to be informational, and now we've announced they're going to be standards-based, if that causes you any concern, please speak now or on the list, shortly.
Brian Rosen, the intended status on the documents has always been proposed standard. So this is your problem. Please fix your problem. But the intended status on all the drafts has been proposed standards.
Right, and I'm taking the blame for that. I'm just stating if that's causing anybody else any grief, please speak now or forever hold your peace.
So if you can just ask that question on the list and give people a couple of days in case they have anything to bring up, but otherwise we'll consider it a mistake and we'll fix it.
Okay, so if we could capture that in the notes, the chairs will send this issue to the list for question. So these are our milestone updates. If anybody has any comments on that, we've sent that message to the list also. And hopefully November 2016 is good. We'll talk about the working group probably at the end of this meeting a little bit about the status of Ecrit and where it's going. So,
Brian Rosen, those are good if we get reviews.
Those are good if we get right. That's true. So let me go find Brian's presentation here. Which one you doing first, data only? Yeah. You gonna have enough time for these slides?
So data only is a way to send a message that contains all the information you would find in an invite, and you use this when there is no real-time media. There is no difference between sending an invite as an emergency call and sending a message as an emergency call, except that you wouldn't have SDP and set up a session with media. So the example here is an alarm, right? An alarm goes off, you send a message, it's got all the same data that would be in an invite, gets routed like any other emergency call, says you're in service SOS and the request URI and a route that you get from the lost server and a route header, and it does exactly the same thing, but it doesn't set up a media. There's a request to deal with a statement about privacy, mainly that privacy for emergency calls, and that would apply to data-only emergency calls, is subject to local regulation. And in many jurisdictions, there are regulations that basically reveal, tell you that certain information that normally is considered private is at least shared with the emergency services people. So that is actually a meaningful statement, and you need to make sure that that's in the consideration. So I put that in. There was a reference to a draft that I put in that lets you do an update to additional data. We haven't worked on that draft for a while, and I decided to just take it out. That was just the easiest thing to progress this document. But I eventually want to get back to that, because some data, and specifically the data that you're using in the message, alarm data would be the example, may in fact change over time. We have another way to do it. You can send it by reference and then repeatedly dereference it. So we have a mechanism to do that, but a push mechanism is probably better. But I don't need to reference it. We don't need that mechanism to make this useful. Tying those two drafts together is probably not a good idea, so I just took it out. Just deleted the text. And then I needed to make changes to conform to the syntax that we have in the final version of additional data. I was using some earlier syntax, and I fixed those. Those are the changes. We did do a working loose last call, but there was not really a large amount of review, and I did make changes, so the chairs agreed. Well, the chairs decided that they would just rerun another last call, which is fine. And that's what they did. So we would appreciate a few reviews. I'm going to get the NINA guys to do some reviews. We're going to deploy this in the NINA architecture, the next generation 911. So this is going to have many interoperable implementations reasonably soon, I think. And I would appreciate anybody taking a look at it and give me any feedback. Questions? This one's pretty simple and fairly mature. It's been around for a while. Have to deal with a lot of these little details, making sure exactly if things are right, but it's actually a pretty simple mechanism.
How many people are following the draft Reddit, keeping up on what's going on?
Again, plea for review. I'd really appreciate it if people would take a look at it. Wouldn't take you long. It's right. Not a long draft. Okay?
Okay.
That's it for data only.
Oops. Similar? Or?
Similar.
Oh, wow, you got 2 slides in this one.
So similar gives you a way to return location information on a find service response. So this is used in 2 circumstances. One, if you have a valid location but you're missing some information, that can occur when you send enough information in the location information in the lost request that we can uniquely identify the location. But you may not have supplied enough information that we really like you to have in the location that you send when you send that location an emergency call. A great example would be you have a street for which there really is only one such street with the right street house number and everything else. Everything else is the same, but you've misspelled or in some way mangled the city name. Another great example is that you don't include the county or the A2 level information. The 911 authorities, or the emergency call authorities really would like to have all locations have that A2 information, but you've given us enough information. You know, there's only one city with that name in this state, and we can supply that information back. So it's complete. It gives you all the fields that we know about that location. In that circumstance, you have sent a valid location in, so you're going to get a route out. But there's information that we know and we want to be able to return it to you so you can save it and send it in the emergency call. The second use is when you send an invalid location. So this is when you send a piece of information in, but we cannot uniquely locate you in the lost database. You don't get a route in this case. You get an error, and you get there's three lists of valid, invalid, and unchecked, and you know the individual elements of location information are put in one of those three things. So in this case, what we're going to provide you with is a valid location. That is, maybe you meant this. So this is a piece of helpful, hopefully helpful information to a user who's entered an incorrect location. We do, all the documents for all of this say that it's highly desirable to validate the location before you have an emergency call, right? You want to make sure that your location is valid before you have to go and get a route for it. So this is going to get used way in advance. When you first get your service, you put in an address. If you put in an address that we can't validate, you need to figure out what the valid location is, and we're going to give you helpful information, give you a valid piece of information that's maybe you meant this. It's exactly the same mechanism. It's just a way to return location information in the find service response of a lost query. Next. We have had several reviews on this document, and I have updated the comment in response to those reviews. One of them was quite extensive, an extensive review, and gave me several very, very valuable comments, which I believe I have implemented virtually all of them. I'm going to have that reviewer, who's not here, Dan Banks, look to make sure that I've done the right thing as part of working group last call. But this has received a lot of interest from the NINA guys. Everybody's very, very interested in this. And the mechanism is good for them, that everything's all right. So we would, again, we'll get a bunch of reviews from them, but anybody in the room who's willing to review it. This one's a little bit, you need to know LOST pretty well to kind of understand what this is doing. But if you're familiar with RFC 5222, then the draft is actually fairly short, but if you don't understand LOST, you will get lost reading this document. Yes, had to say that, right? Working group last call has actually started. I wrote the slides before they actually issued the working group last call, which is great.
Which is unusual. He usually does it 10 minutes before.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, that's right. I had him several days in advance. Wow. The mechanism is actually very simple, but it is something that could use some more review. Okay. And finally, well, any questions?
Are people paying attention to this draft?
Yeah.
We do.
It's mostly the NINA guys.
We need reviews, right? Working group last call,
yeah.
That process. We're asking people to review it, see if they agree with the mechanisms defined, and actually look for editorial nits if you don't like, that stuff, or if you're keen on that stuff. We do need people to review these things. So is there anybody volunteering to help us with the working group last call? Dale. So
I will get a bunch of reviews from the NINA guys. They want this pretty bad, so I can bash them and get them to review it. And finally, we have plan changes. So this one is a mechanism to deal with the reality that the data in the lost server changes slowly over time. An easy example is they build a new road in a town, and we've got to add that piece of information. Another example is that a part of in the US it's called an unincorporated community. It's an area that is not in a city but near a city, and the city expands its boundary to take that area in. We call that annexation. There are other terms used in other countries, but those changes are an actual change in the address. The address changes because instead of having the name of the community, the A4 level, be, you know, like the county name or some neighborhood name, it changes to be the name of the city. So what was valid is no longer valid. That's a planned change. These kinds of changes happen on a schedule. They say at midnight on this date, these things will change. Yes?
Andrew, I'm just going to say we're in a city here that 25 years ago had a lot of planned name changes.
Yes, indeed it did. We're in a city that had quite a number of planned changes. Thank you, Andrew. That mechanism so that happens. Today, the only way that we have to communicate issues like this is that there's this statement in phone BCP that says you should validate periodically. You should revalidate periodically, so that if you have a valid location, every once in a while you should check to make sure that it's still valid. Well, that's a really lousy way to handle a plan change. The way this, so the whole mechanism, what that revalidate is a pull mechanism, and what this draft proposes is a push mechanism. It's a way to say, I'm going to tell you that these locations will become invalid at a certain time, or will change at a certain time. And the way we do that is that we save a URI in the lost server that we poke if a change is going to be made. So when you do a validation request, you can supply a URI. That URI can be saved in the lost database, and whenever that location changes, that URI that you provided will be poked to tell you that that happens. It's all optional at the server. The server can have lots of control over what URIs it will or won't save. You are not guaranteed that URIs that you give it will be saved. You are not guaranteed that you can give them, you know, there's a limit on the size of the URI. You can only have one of them for a given source. You know, there's lots of limits on what this does so that it doesn't overload anybody. But the normal case is that there will only be 1, 2, or 3 maybe URIs against a given location of a finite size. The other thing it does is it provides an input variable called as of that lets you ask the server, will this location that I gave you be valid as of this date? And that's a way to make sure that you can create that when this plan change happens on a known schedule, that you can validate ahead of the change that your proposed new address will be valid as of the date of the change. So you'll get this notification that says this is going to become invalid, you know, 5 days from now. You can 3 days from that location, you can say, well, look, if I changed it to this as of, you know, 5 days from now, 4 days from now, would it be valid? And then the server can say, yes, well, as of that date, it will be valid. If you ask me about it today, it's invalid. In 5 days, it will be valid. The draft has been around for a while. We did adopt it as a working group draft. So I have issued a 00 of draft Ecrit. It's again a fairly simple mechanism, but if you don't understand how lost works, once again, it's pretty hard to do. Basically, just adds this URI as an input parameter that you can save, gives you an object that you can send to that URI to tell you that a change has been made, and gives you this as of thing that lets you say, will it be valid as of a specific date? This is a real problem encountered by real implementations that they know they're going to have, and it also deals with a fact that we discovered in an implementation, which is that because phone BCP says periodically revalidate, the number of transactions on the lost server that are revalidations is 2 or 3 orders of magnitude more than the number of other operations on the lost server. So the lost servers has to be scaled much, much, much larger just because of that periodic revalidation. We'd like to turn that pull notion into a push mechanism so that we can reduce the load on the lost server. It's really the validation part of the lost server. So that's the deployment experience tells us we made a mistake. Periodic revalidation is causing a lot of load that we didn't anticipate, and we'd like to turn that mechanism around and make it push. So we have not had very many reviews on this. I'm asking for a bunch of reviews. Once again, I will go to the NINA guys because they're the ones with the problem here. But I'd appreciate people looking at it and give me some reviews. Yes, Randall.
Randall Gellens. So I did look at the draft, but it was a while ago, and I don't remember a lot about it. So refresh. So the intent, the way this is going to be used, is this going to be used by random clients out in the world every time they want to validate?
It's used by the list.
Infrastructure to infrastructure kind of use.
It's the list operator will use this.
So, and then there'll be some kind of security language in there about, not allowing the saved URI to be a source of malware, spam, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it has, it's just a URI. So you don't retrieve anything from that URI. You only do a post to that URI.
Right, but you don't want to let any arbitrary person give you.
Yeah, you should look at the text. The security considerations is an important part of this particular document. And I've tried to think through, make sure that you can't get a malicious, it helps that you can only post, right? There's no data you're getting back. But nonetheless, you could get an error, it could be nowhere.
You could cause some innocent party to be sending out.
Sure, that's why you limit the number, right? So that you can't, it's not a way to do an amplification attack. You will poke, you will try to push a piece of document to some things. Yes, you would like to know who is requesting this. You should have a policy, and I'm pretty sure I talk about this. Maybe I'll have to go back and look at what I wrote about this, but the identity, your actions at the server should reflect the identity of the entity who's asking for it.
But the idea then, this is infrastructure, but there'll be potentially one of these saved URIs per requester, per location, per saved validated address.
Right, but think about, as again, in a practical thing, the number of lists with the same address is going to be, 1, 2, 3. It's how many access providers there are for that address.
You've got the equivalent of the MSAG, and you've got some large number of addresses in there.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have some number of these per every single validated address. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, but that's, again, in the scale of databases, that's pretty small. As long as there's really only 3 of them, right? If there were 5,000 of them per record, then maybe it would be a concern. And there is definitely advice about, limit how many of these you handle. Any other questions or comments? I think I'm done.
Reviews, again, same with this. There are 3 easy drafts to read. We put them in a working group last call, so we're asking for people to review them, and obviously we'll go to the list with that also. This one first, Randy? You're next. Is this one first? Oh, you can't see that, can you? Huh. Maybe if I do this. And the full screen is. Okay.
So actually version 10 of the eCall document was published today. So that is now available. The major changes since version 7, which was the last real big revision, in order to align with some work that went on in 3GPP, The MSD is now transported using ASN.1 PER encoding, which is a binary encoding. It's no longer in XML. And furthermore, there's a mid-call. So normally in e-call, the vehicle sends the MSD in the initial invite, and then the PSAP sends a response acknowledging that in the reply to the invite, and normally that's it. But there are cases where PSAP might want to request an updated MSD mid-call. So the way that happens is the PSAP sends an info message to the vehicle and says, please send me an MSD. Before, the text said that the vehicle would send that reply MSD in the reply to the info. Now the vehicle sends a new info message with the requested MSD in it. The info package template was filled out with some more text, added an example that showed info, and then one of the other big changes is that because the eCall draft creates the mechanism with this control object and so forth that's reused by the car crash draft, there were some items in the metadata control object that were used for car crash that were not necessary for eCall. So by request, those were all moved out of the eCall document and put into the car crash document as extensions. So that's, and then there are a lot of editorial changes, I guess we can go on to the next slide, I think, which talks about where I got comments from. Yes. So we got a lot of comments from a number of people, and I want to thank all of them. We had a lot of editorial changes resulting from that, and then the big technical changes that I mentioned before. I want to thank Krista especially for spending a lot of time. I think we've got things in a really good shape now. Next slide. Yeah, so there's really just two open issues remaining. One is related to what I mentioned just a second ago about moving the stuff that wasn't directly needed for eCall from the eCall document to the car crash. And one of those is a capabilities element that gets sent from the vehicle to the PSAP to let the PSAP know what the vehicle's capabilities are, so the PSAP will not request anything that the vehicle does not support. So there was a suggestion to move that capabilities object back into the eCall document, but make it optional, so that if the vehicle does not send a capabilities object, it means its capabilities are the minimum set required for eCall in the eCall document. But then the car crash would then make the capabilities mandatory. The other open issue is about the use of, about the info package registration. Right now, the eCall document says that the the info package can be used to send a body part, a MIME type that's listed in the emergency call data set. And so there's been some debate about whether that's legal per the info document. If it is legal, everything's cool. If it's not legal, then we have a few options. One option is that we require, because the purpose of making this a registry instead of a list, a static list, is that the way this gets extended is that, like we've seen right now, for eCall, we have the MSD, which is the data set from the vehicle to the PSAP for pan-European eCall. In North America, we have a different data set, VEDS. So potentially other regions, as they start coming up with implementations of this general mechanism, will start defining their own data sets. And if we want to do that, we want to make it as easy as possible for them to simply define the MIME type for this data set without having to go through a lot of work, publish an RFC, and so forth. So one option would be that we require a new info package registration that would include everything in the earlier ones for every new MIME type that might get deployed in a different region. Another option, which is kludgier but avoids the legalistic argument, would be that we don't use info. We use re-invite or options or something like that, but some other SIT message that doesn't have the legalistic restrictions. A third option is that we define, and this is also ugly and a kludge, but perfectly legal, I think, you define a MIME type that says multi-part emergency services data, and then you put a parameter in there. And what you do is you just, only for info, you just take your actual MIME type and cram it into this multi-part as an extra wrapper around it so that the info package only has the one MIME type. It's horribly ugly, but it would get around the wording of the info package restriction. So there you have it.
Krister.
Krister Holmberg. Yes, first of all, I also like to thank you for, we've given a lot of comments and things which came out from 3DPP, other comments that you had, and things have gone very smoothly, but as you said, there are a few open issues. I think there's one more issue than this also, which was raised by my colleague, which we were discussing offline, was this usage of content ID and call info. But I think but that's the main issue is this info, and I'll try to be short, but I mean, we had this previously, we had this legacy info before we did info packages, and there were a lot of problems with that. People used it for all kind of things. There were no real semantics associated with it. You didn't really know what people supported and what they were going to do when they received this. So we defined the info package, which has all the semantics, and one thing which this info package does say is that you define which MIME types are associated with this info package. Now the way it's done here in eCall is a different. Instead of listing these MIME types, it says that you can use any MIME type which exists in this specific IANA registry. So whenever people want to use something new, they don't need to define a new info package. They just add stuff into this IANA registry. And that is my main issue, because I think, first of all, I mean, we don't know in the long run what people are going to put there, as long as they can justify it somehow being, you know, emergency related. And another example, or I also think it gives a bad precedence. I've given an example, I will give it to you, I don't know if it's the best one, but assume that someone registers an info package for transporting, you know, online game information. And they create IANA registry for online game MIME types. Then we start getting all these games, 10 games, 100 games, 200 games. They all define their own MIME type, and they all put this into the same registry and use the same info package. So I think it's a slippery slope and a dangerous way to go. So my suggestion is really, and I think that that's the original intention of info package, when you need something new, you define a new info package. I said here earlier, you mentioned RFC, but that's not true. You don't need an RFC to define a new info package. It's specification required and an expert review, so you can define it wherever you want. Any, you know, the Chinese, the Americans, whatever they define this, it can be done. And info packages are cheap in that sense. So I really think that should be done. We list explicitly the info packages, and these are the MIME types you use, and nothing else. Also, what's important to think that this is not only about the MIME types. Another thing which we have in the info package is a section where you need to either define or reference a specification which describes how this info package is used. And that, of course, includes how the MIME types are used. So now, assuming that you're adding a new MIME type to this registry, which coming into this info package, you would also have to update this, add a reference to the specification which now describes the usage of this MIME type, and so on. And maybe it could be doing something else. Maybe it could affect some of the other things which are in the info package, rate, whatever we have. I mean, we don't know. So then you would have to update the info package, and there is really no procedure for updating the info package, the actual template that has been provided to IANA. There is no mechanism for that. So my suggestion, and I have said offline, I am willing to help whatever I can do to do that, is we define this info package for eCall, for cars crash, we define another info package. We can use similar name, no problem. We can even, it's a lot of copy paste we can do, and then for, you know, Asia, whoever needs, they're doing their info package. I think that's a clean way, easy way. You know exactly what it's there. You don't need to go and look in this registry where there's something new stuff there, even though, and so on. And I think that's a generic way to do it. I know that there is these capabilities. In this specific case, there are mechanisms that we have done so we can know what's supported. But I don't think that's where we should go, that individual info packages start defining their own negotiation mechanism. That's not what we should do. There is a common negotiation mechanism which when you send your invite, you include this receive info header field, which names the info package. If I support this info package and I know which MIME ties are associated, everything is good. So I really think that, I strongly think we should do that here also. Sorry for you know, yeah.
Got it, thank you.
But I didn't want to come up here and say that I really appreciate the work that's been done. I'm really thankful for that. I think we've got done a lot of progress, but this is the main issue where we unfortunately are not on the same page.
Brian Rosen. When you add a new block of data, all we're doing is adding a piece of data, right? It's a hunk of XML that we're sending between the entities, right? We need to decide what level of review is appropriate to add a piece of data using the mechanism we're providing. If we decide that specification review is the right level, a specification required is the right level of documentation to add a new thing, then adding to the registry should have specification required. If we decide that that's not an appropriate level of documentation, it's too much overhead for the kind of information that we have, then maybe we would go back to just an expert review. By requiring that you are doing a new info package, you are demanding that you do specification required. That might be what we want, but it isn't a decision that we're making. It's just, you got to do it that way because that's what information, what info says. It is low overhead. We can build a template that says to do an info package, you know, fill in these blanks, done. So it's not a huge amount of overhead. Specification required is more than, you know, a expert review and other things. You gotta, well, if you read the definition of standards required, it's a lot more than just document required.
Krista, I'm not talking about standard required. Maybe I remember the definition. Maybe I remember the definition of specification required wrong. But what is needed is there needs to be a publicly available document, which the expert reviewer can, because the expert reviewer needs to, you know, look at this. It doesn't have to be an RFC. It doesn't have to be an RFC. Exactly. So, yeah.
Specification just means specification. You have it there in front of you. It's not a standard. Does not have to have consensus. It just has to be written down.
Something that
Yeah, I mean, honestly, yeah.
Right. So, but all I'm saying, I mean, just for reinforcing the same thing, I'm just going to repeat it, right? We need to decide what the level of control that we want over adding another hunk of data. If we decide that specification required is appropriate, great, let's do that. By requiring info, we don't get to make that, we get to make it stronger, right? We can say, and adding something to the registry takes more than specification required. I don't think we're going to do that, but we could. But we're stuck at the minimum level of specification required, which may or may not be appropriate. I happen to think it's not appropriate, but we can make that decision independently. However, I am not in favor of playing games with the SIP info package RFC, right? If the SIP guys say, no, you can't do that, he's right. You got to specify what MIME types go in the package. That's the end of the story. We're going to do it.
And just
in my opinion.
for a point of interest, the chairs are trying to solicit help to look at that and just make that decision too, outside of this community, right? Robert. So,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Andrew Allen. Yeah, I have a lot of sympathy for Krista's points here. I think the reason we did all this work to come up with the new version of info, with the info packages, was to prevent the kind of proprietary explosion of the use of info, which meant it didn't interoperate And I feared if we add MIME types that are outside of the control of the actual package, that effectively you've got different versions of the same package that aren't going to interoperate. As Brian said, I think we can make this a template. You can be very clear. We put that in the RFC. This is a template. If you want to add a new usage, then this is how you do it. This is how you create what you would put in your specification. You just fill in the blanks.
So if I could actually just play devil's advocate for a moment, I think I very well understand the concern that you guys have about the reason there's info package and the reason requirements, and how allowing us to do this could potentially create a slippery slope that allows, the game people to just go hog wild with completely different types of data, with completely different semantics and so forth, and that would be a mess. But just to play devil's advocate, if I was a game designer trying to do that sort of thing, I could easily do that with InfoNow several different ways. I could define one MIME type and just say this MIME type contains XML or JSON or whatever, and then I put whatever I want in there that has wildly different semantics and sizes and rates and everything else.
Yeah, this is Hannes. Yeah, I think the case that Krista provided here, sort of the worry seems a little bit constructed. Like the fact that you come up with the gaming community is no, it's like, is this a real concern? Like literally the gaming community writing zip applications and then putting stuff into the emergency services. You must be kidding, right?
No, he's not saying they would use emergency services. He's saying they would use what Krista is.
I said that they would define their own IANA registry for gaming MIME types, and then they would have one single info package which points to that registry, and then everyone starts putting these MIME types into the same registry, and it all gets associated with one single info package. I didn't say that they were going to use the emergency IANA registry, but they were going to do something similar with their own registry. Basically allowing you to have one info package, and then people can start adding MIME types into that. That's what I want to avoid. And of course, anyone can define an XML type, which is very flexible, and we can't prevent that. But I mean, that's not a reason for us to do the wrong thing just by saying, yeah, but someone else could do this. We should do what's right, and that's all we can do.
But if the reason for us to do something in a more difficult way, which isn't the semantics that we want, is to prevent us from being a precedent for somebody else to do the wrong thing, even without us being that precedent, the people who want to do the wrong thing can do the wrong thing.
Chris, I don't think it's easier, because even if we would move forward this way, there would be a lot of text needed. We need text, either an update to RFC 6086 or something describing how this is done. Yes, you can create these registers and all these things. And we need rules, how it's done, how do you update the info package. There would be a lot of work, not for you maybe, because this would be maybe for me. So I think that defining new C packages is really the easiest way to do it. You need to write a little text, but then it's done and it's clear, and no one has any it's no ambiguity.
Okay, so just a time check. We got like 6 minutes, and he's got to get through this one, then that 6 minutes too, so.
Georg Meyer, I'm working with 3GPP as well, and I also support Krista. I think if we create a precedence here, I mean, when we're looking at the SIP protocol in 3GPP, there are people who look if there are any holes where they can sneak something in. What you're doing here, and I'm not a fan of that, at least not when I'm here in these meetings. So, but from being too bad. No, I just think we should go along the lines that the SIP info protocol message was intended to. And we had long debates in 3GPP as well, how we can use info. And we are very restrictive in this usage, and I hope we can also be that here. and not open some doors that maybe
I
lead
mean,
into
if
the wrong
somebody wants to
directions.
misuse info and cram stuff in, like I said, there's plenty of ways to do it that don't violate the letter of the RFC. So,
Andrew Allen, well, I would hope that the expert reviewer of the info package would at least catch some of those. If it looks like you're just basically creating a generic container to stuff in whatever you like. I mean, as Georg said, in FreeGPP, we could create an info package called FreeGPP application and just like put everything in the future, never have to come back to IETF again. This is not what we want to encourage. So, and I don't think it's really that hard. Pretty much we can fill out the whole template in the RFC as a registration template, and you just need an identifier. You just need to fill in this bit and this bit and this bit. We'll have two examples, right? One for equal, one for car crash, and it shouldn't be that difficult.
well, but the issue isn't with what we do for eCall and car crash. The issue is what does the next region that might need so MSD is one set of data. In North America, we're using VEDS, which is a pretty flexible set of data. But what happens if China or Australia or Saudi Arabia or some other region or country decides they want something that isn't quite VEDS, they want their own data set? So what the documents say now is, well, you define a MIME type and you add it to the registry, and everything else is exactly the same. So we're going to say, in addition to the MIME type, you're going to have a specification for the info package, which, as Brian points out,
Specification is just a document. Right?
requires it. I'm sorry?
Specification is just a document. That's all it is, a publicly available document. And following that template, so we provide them a template, and we identify, okay, here, fill out your own stuff. Fill out your own stuff. It doesn't seem that it's a huge piece of documentation. And basically, we want good documentation so we can implement that thing without having to go through all kinds of hoops and hurdles in order to find out what it is.
Yes, Chris, exactly. So the Saudis will have to define their own info package, and I don't think that's an issue. And I mean, no matter what it's done, I assume they're going to document it somewhere in some document, right? So no matter how it's done, they're just not going to send an email to Ayana and hey, here is our MIME type, and then it's not documented anywhere. I mean, and I don't think even. I don't know what the IETF procedures for registering new MIME types are, but I would assume that that's not going to pass either. Just someone saying, please register this MIME type without any indication what's in it. So they will have to define an info package. They, write it down, and it's not that difficult. I mean, it's not that too much information that you need to provide. The real stuff is how you use it, and that they will have to define it somewhere else, and the expert reviewer will look at that, and the info package template with reference to that, and everything is good.
Okay, so let's get through this real quick.
Sure.
I want my 5-minute discussion at the
Okay.
end.
Well, actually, there's really very little to say on this. It's just the mirror of it. I mean, the stuff that came out of eCall was moved, the eCall metadata control object was moved in here. There are a lot of editorial changes, and I think that's it. So once we decide whether we're moving the capabilities object, whether we're leaving it here or moving it back into eCall so it forms like part of the base spec for the extension here, that's really the only open issue that affects this document.
Brian Rosen, in the interest of fairness, I just looked up the registration requirements for MIME type, and it's more onerous than specification requirement.
Well, it depends.
Correct.
It depends on which.
Well, right, it depends on which tree we allow it to be.
Right. And what
But
we've,
it's,
right.
we probably need to specify that if we allow it to be in the vendor tree.
So,
All right, if we have comments, please use the mic. If we don't have comments, then we're done here.
thanks, Randy. Oh, Dale, one quick one. It's got to be quick.
Well, what I was saying off the microphone, Andrew Allen again, is at least for public safety applications in different regions, I would hope they wouldn't be in the vendor tree.
I'm sorry?
For public safety applications like car crash, I hope they wouldn't be in the vendor tree.
Right, absolutely not. And particularly because what we're really talking about here is it's not just public safety. We're talking about vehicle-initiated emergency calls and we're talking about region-specific data sets for them, car manufacturers would probably want to implement all of the regions in the same vehicle so that the vehicle just knows what to send based on where it is. You couldn't do that in the vendor tree. I mean, you wouldn't want to.
Brian Rosen, so that's a comment to change the text to say that. It's too late, but we should have probably done that with additional data. And having said that, it's specification required from a recognized standards organization.
So I think we actually have an out on that, though, because it's not just that you have to register a MIME type, but you also need expert review for the IANA registry, I believe.
Okay. Thanks, Randy. So we're going to go back to what we talked about originally, which was basically the document status. So we have no individual drafts hanging out there targeted at Ecrit, right? So nobody has submitted anything for a while. We have these 5 drafts that are on the screen that are 3 of them we called working group last call this week, 2nd working group last call on a couple of those. Okay, so we're getting to the point where our work is winding down. And when we submitted the request to have a meeting at IETF 96, there was 25 meeting requests more than they had space for. So my point I'm getting to is we're almost, if we don't start wrapping up some of this and winding down and keep asking for meeting slots, we're going to start doing the IETF a disservice by, taking a meeting slot where there's a work group that really does need to meet. So I'm encouraging people to review the working group last call documents. So we basically don't have to meet, in Seoul. I mean, Alyssa's gonna, overpower me in any way, shape or form, but we got to get through these issues that between the car crash and e-call. I think those are not insurmountable issues. I think if we, pay attention to those and work through it, we can get those documents done prior to Seoul. So, I mean, that's from a chair position. That's what I would like people to start working on.
Brian Rosen, I mean, I certainly agree with what you said. We put November down you put November down, and I'm hopeful that we can meet that.
But I think we had November a couple years ago on it too.
Yeah,
so.
I understand. It depends on reviews. It depends on reviews. I'm going to work hard to get reviews so that we can do those things. But I do believe that there is more work to do, and that more work is a result of deployment experience that we're having. I know of at least 2 things that we want to do. So they can be done as individual drafts. We can do it. We can leave the mailing list open. I understand all those kinds of things, but I think it would be good. I think it would be better to leave the working group open for a while to do those additional pieces of work.
Okay. Thanks for the warning. Obviously, what we have to view is submission or drafts is what we look at.
So I would hope that all of these documents are with the ISG before the next meeting. If the gating factor is that this is a small group of people who need to review all of them, or who are the likely candidates to review all of them, but that would be my expectation for this. But I think the other thing about this group is that there's very little overhead in keeping the group open and keeping the mailing list, and just having it sit there. Even if there's no work for a while, there's no reason to close it for this particular topic, it seems like things might pop up now and again, and I think that's fine. We can sort of be in dormant state, and that doesn't cost us anything. So that would be my recommendation, is that after we get through the rest of these, that we go into dormant state, and then people can always ping the list with new things as they come up. And if a year goes by or something and we change our minds, we can close the group, or just keep the list, or we have a lot of options. So
right.
That's my suggestion.
I think my point was more around taking precious minute time or meeting time at the meetings for face-to-face.
You don't have to meet.
When this should be done by then. I
In
don't-
general, a working group all of whose documents are into working group last call doesn't usually meet unless there's like comments coming back from the ISG, so.
Yeah, I don't want to be discussing info packages in November in Seoul. Well, we need to go to the list, but yeah, we're trying to get some expert review on that. But so that's the chair's piece. For the people that made notes, are you subscribers to the Ecrit list? Do you? Okay, so I'll get with you as soon as to get the notes from you. So.
Andrew Allen, just one comment on the slide, Mark. 3GPP is working requirements for like service. I think it is the same service. E-call.
I'm sorry?
For the e-call. Just a comment on the wording of the slide.
Oh, okay.
It really is, there isn't the IETF e-call, and this is a point that Keith made, and the 3GPP e-call. There's a single service
Well, but
e-call.
weren't we, Alyssa, aren't we still holding this draft until we get hard requirements, or if we ever see requirements out of 3GPP?
Well, I think his point is just that we basically did this for the service being developed in 3GPP. We wrote the draft here for that, so it's just one service. But I mean, I guess but I'm assuming the timing on that is like we basically know everything. Like if we resolve these last couple open issues, we can go to working group last call and go to IETF last call, and that will be okay for 3GPP. Is that correct?
I think so. Just one thing. We have a meeting. Well, we have a meeting next week, and we have 2 more meetings, one of which clashes with the Seoul meeting to get this done for release 14. So.
Okay, but
Exactly what other issues might get dug up between now and then, but it doesn't seem that
okay, but it's possible that new requirements will still be popping up from 3GPP in November.
Well, but still, I mean, you're going to. Yeah.
I think the work is already pretty stable as far as the 3DPP work is concerned. Obviously, they reference, and we have all these open issues, and I know they have a meeting next week, so they're gonna be. But I think I'd say there are no main issues. I mean, we found issues at previous meeting, but those have all been taken care of. So I had to say things went much smoother than I thought. So
Okay, so, but you remember the original idea, we were going to run it through IETF last call, and before Alyssa hit the pub request button, we were going to check back to see if there's anything else we hadn't covered from 3GPP perspective. So, I mean, we can still follow that, but if you know something that says we don't have to deal with that anymore, then, you know, please let us know. Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't say we're quite there right now, but I guess we could also initiate as well, right? We could liaise to IETF, Ecrit from 3GPP and say, we think this is good now, so don't hold it anymore. Or if you're waiting on us, then send us a communication and we'll get back to you.
Okay, we are officially 3 minutes over. Bits and Bites is opening up, and there's going to be free food and beer, so I don't want to spend it on it. Thank you, everybody. Oh, thank you.